Part 15. Lord of all people, am I the only one in the fallen empire? Author, Mishita De. Chapter 141. It looks so interesting. Bihexio couldn't help but say while holding his face. As the commander-in-chief of the witch hunters, Bihexio was in charge of the rear with Hyukin and others. After all, after the pagan knights were recruited, the witch hunters with only a few hundred people were no different from the logistics troops. But at this moment, watching the fierce battle on the front line, Bihexio suddenly felt itchy. Reaching out and poking Hyukin's waist, Bihexio asked his own question under Hyukin's murderous eyes. Is that thing built? Can't you see it yourself? Hyukin pointed back and said unhappily. Behind the crowd, hundreds of catapults had just been built. This is probably the most normal prop used by everyone in this game, and it is not difficult to make. What is really worth praising is the ammunition that these catapults are about to throw. Volcanic bomb, strange item. Introduction, a product made by mixing various existing bombs. No volcanic bomb is exactly the same after the explosion, it will produce a beautiful scene like a volcanic eruption. That's right, because there are too many old bombs in the warehouse, Bihexio simply took people to tie all kinds of bombs together with fuses. And because of the characteristics of mine-laying proficiency, these messy bombs can be used normally after being strung together. Even because of the large equivalent. In the feudal era, every volcanic bomb was a well-deserved wonder. Explosion is art. Since the destruction of the old shrine, Bihexio has liked the feeling of mushroom clouds rising from his hands. When the empire awakened, this feeling became stronger. Ignite. After receiving Bihexio's order, hundreds of catapults slightly turned their angles and then threw out the ignited volcanic bombs. A large number of volcanic bombs that integrated the messy bombs rolled into the forest and rushed towards the central line of the coalition forces. Boom! The first volcanic bomb exploded. But an explosion is not the end for volcanic bombs, on the contrary, it is just the beginning. A large number of different types of bombs flew everywhere due to the explosion, and then there were secondary and tertiary explosions. There were even some bombs similar to fireworks that went straight into the sky and exploded in the sky. In an instant, the volcanic bomb showed a beauty like a volcanic eruption. Sasha was standing beside Gao Qiang at this moment, staring at the clusters of volcanic eruptions rising in the forest. So beautiful. Although it was a waste, it was really worth it. Of course, beauty has a price. People who watched the volcano from a distance only saw the beauty of the volcanic eruption. And those who were under the volcano felt the horror of the volcanic eruption firsthand. There was a wailing in the forest. Hundreds of bombs of various types were flying randomly in the explosion, and they had no idea where to hide to avoid these explosions. There were even some mines that were not triggered by the explosion, but just bounced to the ground, waiting for the arrival of the destined person. Since the vassal army entered the front battlefield, the pagan knights have given up the entanglement with the front line soldiers and started to move towards the center line. Some lords still want to stabilize the morale of their soldiers. But with explosions everywhere, it is difficult for his words to reach the ears of the people. Even the lords who have such plans have exposed their own existence. When the pagan knight raised the cold muzzle of the gun, no people could protect him. Bang bang bang. Sporadic gunshots sounded from the middle of the coalition. The soldiers of the coalition did not suffer many casualties. But in the war interface, the names of lords who were hostile to Gao Qiang were rapidly decreasing. This time, most of the deaths were lords. The death of a large number of lords caused a feeling of timidity in the hearts of lords of all races. Although it was not recorded in the war interface, the war weariness in the hearts of each lord was actually increasing rapidly. Seeing that the war weariness of the people was about to soar to 100%. Finally, a lord could not sit still. Let's retreat. 1,000-mile embankment is destroyed by an ant hole. When the first grain of sand began to disintegrate, the formation completely collapsed. Julio narrowed his eyes and laughed. The enemy army fled in panic. What a group of cowardly rats. The coalition army had tens of millions of soldiers and horses, but only 1 million could actually come into contact with Gao Qiang. There were even fewer who really fought, only about a few 100,000. Unfortunately, just such a collision, the war weariness of the coalition army was already full. At the moment of defeat, tens of millions of different races fled in panic. Wow! After fighting for a long time, Data Deleted finally digested the god of darkness. Then he waved his tentacles and swept the entire god of wine into his mouth. Burp. The strong smell of wine made Data Deleted burp, and he seemed to be a little more drunk. Gradually, Data Delete's body shrank and turned back into a square cat, rubbing against Gao Qiang. Go away. Gao Qiang used his arm to push Data Delete aside in disdain. Now Data Delete was full of alcohol, and he couldn't get used to it. Whoa! Data Delete stretched out two big eyes, blinked at Gao Qiang resentfully, and dodged to the side. Hey, Lord, come and see, Sasha's voice came from a distance. After the coalition forces completely retreated, Sasha slowly walked to the battlefield holding a flag. At this time, she was waving the flag towards Gao Qiang, as if she had found something good. As for Wang Chuan, he was not with Sasha at the moment. The war on the ground had ended, ending with the defeat of the coalition forces. But the battle of the gods in the sky continued. It was just that Wang Chuan was there, and the pressure on the gods was gradually increasing. More and more bodies of gods who had been lost walked out of the Yellow Spring Road, just to suppress the gods here and prevent them from escaping. Of course, the war in the sky had nothing to do with Gao Qiang. Approaching Sasha, Gao Qiang leaned over and took a look at what Sasha said. A building could be vaguely seen less than a few kilometers away from here. The shrine of the god of life. The pagan knight had already entered the shrine because he had taken the lead. Unlike other races in the coalition forces. As the host of the life god system, the elves could escape but the temple could not. Although many elven lords had already followed the coalition army to retreat. But some home-loving lords still stayed, ready to rely on the shrine of the god of life to resist for a while. Among them was Lan Yan. When Gao Qiang and Sasha arrived at the shrine, Lan Yan had been tied up and thrown to the ground. He did not run, and he could not run away. Ever since he sensed the breath of another source in the camp of the revival of holy power, Lan Yan already knew his fate. Lord of all people, am I the only one in the fallen empire? Author, Mi Shi De. Chapter 142. The source essence is placed on him, just like an accurate GPS positioning navigation. No matter where he runs to, as long as another being with the source essence wants to find him, he can't escape. Interesting. Gao Qiang glanced at the situation in the shrine. The corpses of elven warriors were everywhere. Some warriors were smashed by the muskets in the hands of the pagan knights as soon as they broke in, and their bodies were mixed with blood and covered the walls. Of course, some warriors were tied up, just like Lan Yan. Walking in front of Lan Yan, Gao Qiang stared at the other person's eyes. Lan Yan's eyes were very calm, and he didn't seem to be very afraid of the arrival of death. Aren't you afraid of death? Gao Qiang asked curiously. Lan Yan seemed to want to say something, but his mouth was blocked and he could only make a sound. At this time, Sasha began to call Gao Qiang again. If you don't want to say it, forget it. Gao Qiang shook his head and turned to walk towards Sasha. He could feel that the elf lord just now was a carrier of the essence, but he didn't know which essence it was. Well, from the momentum, the other party seemed a little weak. Gao Qiang even felt that the other party was not much stronger than himself, so weak. His appearance was also ordinary, belonging to the common face of the elves, extremely mediocre. According to Yane's previous statement, there should be no other reverse Kabbalah essences in this war game. Since he couldn't take the other party's essence. Compared to killing him directly, Gao Qiang still preferred to send it to a Xia, which was also a favor. Thinking about it, he had already come to Shasha's side. Gao Qiang followed Shasha's eyes. It was the statue of the god of life. After the god of life woke up, tender buds sprouted on his statue, which looked delicate. Well, it was no different from ordinary tender buds. However, Shasha had already reached out and grabbed it. Pulled off a leaf and held it in his mouth. Gao Qiang couldn't help but flick Sasha's forehead. You are so active when you meet someone who likes eating. Other flag bearers always charge with me, but you charge for me. Hee hee. Sasha smiled embarrassedly. I will remember it next time, definitely next time. Yes, Lord, don't you want a leaf? Sasha casually plucked a leaf from the statue of the god of life and handed it to Gao Qiang. Gao Qiang glanced at the leaf in Sasha's hand suspiciously. Sasha, who never likes to eat vegetarian food, chewed it so vigorously, so this leaf must have a big problem. But after thinking about it, he took it and took a light bite. Mint flavor? He raised his eyebrows. Gao Qiang imitated Sasha and put the leaf into his mouth, and a sweet feeling surged to the tip of his tongue. It was like chewing mint gum, making the whole mouth cool and refreshing, but not as irritating as mint. Soon, the two of them were leaning against the statue of the god of life. Under the murderous gaze of some elves, they pulled up the leaves from the statue one by one. The things of God are good, Gao Qiang said while chewing the leaves. Sasha also nodded in agreement. She just didn't like to eat vegetarian food, but she still liked to eat sugar. It is rare to find fructose like the god of life that is pure and natural, without additives and pollution. Oh, right. Chewing the leaves, Gao Qiang suddenly remembered the things in the Holy Light God system. The battle on his side was over. But it seemed that the Holy Light God system was not yet. Data deleted. He suddenly fell into a state of anger because the Holy Land was destroyed. And the last Holy Land he had left that had not been touched was the one owned by Suyukai, wasn't it? The perspective was connected to the eye in the Holy Light God system. Gao Qiang saw the battle situation of the Holy Light God system at the moment. The towering city wall was directly destroyed by the huge force. A giant tens of meters tall was leading the Minotaur troops to wreak havoc among the paladins. The eye placed by Gao Qiang grew into a huge man-eating plant. Below the eye, the remains of the Minotaur were torn into pieces. Of course, there was also Suyukai's terrified face. For Suyukai, nothing was more exciting than these few days. After the Minotaur god of war woke up, he turned into a giant taller than the city wall. A punch made a hole in the wall of the Holy Light God system, allowing the Minotaur to invade in large numbers. On the other hand, due to conflicts between the sons of the saints for some reasons, the original defense advantage not only did not work, but also turned into a civil war between several saints. In other words, the current saint forces are resisting the invasion of the Minotaur with 1/3 of their troops. Lords like Suyukai who joined in the middle of the process really suffered an unexpected disaster. Without high-level troops like the Paladin, it is difficult for the ordinary troops of the human race to resist the Minotaur troops. And the core lords of the Holy Light God system are busy resisting the invasion of the God of War. Naturally, no one has the time to care about a lord like Suyukai. Therefore, not long ago, Suyukai's territory was discovered by the Tauran lord who broke in. The ending is obvious. Suyukai was not an elite to begin with, and with no advantages in all aspects, his defense line was instantly torn to pieces by the Tauran. Even the buildings were demolished by the Minotaurs. It was at that time Suyukai saw a mouth seem to grow in the air. No, it didn't seem. The Minotaur's bodies everywhere explained everything. Your SAN value -3. After staring at Suyukai for a while with the eyes, Gao Qiang turned his attention back to the god of war after making sure that Su Yukai was fine. Gao Qiang's eye, growth period. Features: unspeakable, heavenly soldiers descend, invite gods to raise together. Invite gods to raise together. Introduction: being strong alone is never really strong. Effect: you can teleport any type of soldier in the Holy Land to the location of this Holy Land. This is probably the weakest eye Gao Qiang has ever seen. Thinking of the strength of the previous two eyes, Gao Qiang couldn't help but be a little disappointed with this last eye. But this war game is about to end, so Gao Qiang no longer dwells on it. In addition to being able to summon the Knights of the Church, the characteristic of inviting the gods to help allows it to use other eyes as portals. Although Gao Qiang's large forces are not near the two eyes. But this does not mean that Gao Qiang has no soldiers to use. In fact, there are still many beings he can summon. For example, the fat and fleshy chicken god in the chicken coop, or the countless root vines accumulated in the victory god system. Gao Qiang tried to summon. The first batch of responders were naturally the Knights of the Church. No matter where they are, they can always reinforce the Holy Land at the first time. Then came countless bright red root vines, which covered the ground and instantly created an unusual sense of desolation for the world. What Gao Qiang did not expect was that the chicken god actually responded to his call. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Lord of all people, am I the only one in the fallen empire? Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 143. After the summoning began, the size of the eye began to expand rapidly to allow the root warriors to transport it quickly. Such anomalies were naturally seen by most of the beings inside and outside the Holy Light God system. Is that his eye? Above the sky, the Sun God collided with the Lord of Holy Light again, and suddenly retreated rapidly, leaving the territory of the Holy Light God system. Looking at the eye with a big mouth and extremely ferocious, the Sun God was somewhat doubtful. So that's it? The Holy Light God had no intention of chasing out of the territory. He just shrugged helplessly. When he found that the existence inserted the eye in front of him, he knew who was the righteous existence. Holy Lord, you. Before the Sun God finished speaking, the position of the eye broke out again. A huge root vine ancient tree drilled out from the big mouth torn by the eye. Since it was cut in half by the God of Victory last time, the root vine ancient tree has become an independent existence, and naturally it can be transported through the characteristics of the eye. At the moment when the ancient root vine tree appeared, a strong sense of danger enveloped the God of War. The God of War stopped wreaking havoc in the ranks of the paladins and turned to look at the root vine mother tree. He felt a strong breath of ruin from the root vine mother tree. That breath was even worse than that of the gods. It seemed to want to drag the whole world into the abyss of ruin. A rustling sound came from the place where the root vine was covered. One after another, the root vine warriors stood up from the place covered by the scarlet root vine. Before the Minotaurs could react, the bullets fired by the root vine warriors had pierced their bodies with red tracks. Because most of the warriors were not wearing armor, the root vines quickly eroded from the injured parts of the Minotaurs to their heads. Lines of blood covered the eyes of the Minotaur warriors. From a distance, they looked like angry bulls. But in fact, only they themselves can feel the despair of the passing of life. Perhaps because of the different races, the Minotaurs did not become mentally disordered like the elves due to the erosion of the roots. After the roots pierced their brain nerves, they often had no choice but to die. It was at this time. Cluck, cluck, cluck. The sudden crowing of a chicken broke the doomsday atmosphere at the scene. Everyone turned their heads in a daze. When they saw a big hen as fat as a ball appear behind the root vine mother tree, they couldn't help but have a few more question marks on their foreheads. Gao Qiang also stared at the chicken god who was teleported with a black line on his head. Atmosphere, the chicken god called like this. There was no atmosphere at all. After a while, because the roots were still spreading forward, many lords gradually came to their senses. It's just a big hen, there's nothing to be curious about. The most urgent task is to deal with the weird mother tree. As the root vine mother tree opened its crimson twisted giant eyes, the Minotaur lords looked at the god of war. This kind of battle was not something they could participate in. And the god of war did not disappoint them. Moving his huge body, the god of war immediately passed over the heads of the paladins and walked straight towards the root vine mother tree. Unlike the god of victory who was half asleep and half awake at that time. After fully awakening, the god of war seemed more flexible and acted more recklessly. His momentum was still gradually increasing. Whether it was the battle between the Minotaur and the paladin, or the attack launched by the root vine, it was nourishing his body. When the Lord of Holy Light could not take action, it was not a problem for him to sweep the Holy Light system with his existence alone. Because he represented the war itself. The bullets of the root vine warriors hit the huge body of the god of war. At first, it could cause some damage. But as time went on, the god of war seemed to be strengthened in a specific direction. The muscles of his divine body began to become as firm as steel, and the roots could no longer penetrate his body. What no one expected was that the chicken god, who had been ignored for a long time, actually rushed to the front of the root tree with a cluck. Although his body was not small, it was only compared to ordinary humans. Facing the body of the god of war, the whole body of the chicken god was not as big as the other party's palm. However, the chicken god still had some speed. Although it was still several kilometers away, in a few minutes, the chicken god had arrived at the feet of the god of war. Until now, the god of war had not spoken a word. He just looked at the little chicken in front of him and showed a contemptuous smile. Boom! With one step, the chicken god was crushed into a chicken pie on the spot. Far away in the god of life, Gao Qiang covered his face. Just now, when he saw the chicken god rushing out like that, he thought there would be some surprises, but the chicken god gave him a second death. Come to think of it, I don't know if chicken god can live a third time. Your subject's chicken god characteristic has been triggered. When did chicken god become his subject? Could it be because of his resurrection after that death? Listening to the war game prompt that suddenly came to his ears, Gao Qiang turned to the perspective of the eye again. In the perspective of the eye, the god of war stepped on the meat pie under his feet twice more. But all the beings facing the god of war were now looking at the back of the god of war. The chicken god who had been trampled to death by him. At this moment, he was standing behind the god of war with a pair of empty dead fish eyes, staring at him silently. Gao Qiang tried to check the personal attributes of the chicken god. It was actually possible to open it. Chicken god. Profession, god. Mythology, legend has it that this is a hen that can lay golden eggs as long as he is still alive. He can lay a golden egg every day that can cure all diseases in the world and is worth a lot of money. After being killed for the eggs, in order to correct this mistake, he gained a new power. All beings who tried to kill him will be retaliated endlessly. Features, old family, don't kill chickens. Looking at the name of the feature, Gao Qiang's mouth twitched. What a straightforward name. Don't kill chickens. Introduction, killing chickens as a signal, where are the 500 swordsmen? Effect 1, the chicken god can be resurrected once a day. Effect 2, when the chicken god is killed, 500 chicken warriors who are immune to physical damage will be summoned for revenge. At this time, a cold breath suddenly appeared behind the god of war. For a god, this breath is too obvious. However, just as he turned around, a large rooster flew out from nowhere. Those roosters began to peck at the muscles of the god of war. The muscles that could not be penetrated by even the roots were as fragile as paper in front of the mouths of those large roosters. The god of war seemed to have not felt anything yet, and one of his legs had been pecked empty by hundreds of roosters, revealing the white bones under the muscles. The whole body also fell to one side. Lord of all people, am I the only one in the fallen empire? Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 144. The furious god of war waved his arms, as if he wanted to grind the offending roosters into minced meat. But every time he slapped the roosters under his palms like slapping mosquitoes, the roosters would always come out of his palms intact. Even on the way out, the beaks of the big roosters would take away some of the god of war's flesh and blood. These things seemed to take a long time, but in the eyes of the Minotaur lords. In fact, it took less than half a minute. The god of war had already fallen down. The big roosters kept flapping their wings to find food on his body. The demeanor of not being full no matter how much flesh and blood they ate made the Minotaur lords who attacked the holy light system swallow their saliva. Is this the holy light system that represents justice? So the paladin they just beat turned out to be a novice monster? Why are the roots and vines and hens that appear now more terrifying and weird than each other? Those who know that they are attacking the pantheon of the Lord of Holy Light. Those who don't know would think that they have entered the lair of some evil god. By the way, is there an evil god in this world? Before the Minotaur Lord could think about this question, he rubbed his silly head. The god of war had been eaten up in front of everyone in a slow manner. Killing a chicken has a price, and killing the chicken that revives the holy power is even more so. And now, he has paid the price. The original tens of meters tall giant has disappeared without a trace. Instead, there is a skeleton lying on the ground. Gao Qiang couldn't help but click his tongue twice. It's a pity that the undead did not participate in this war game, otherwise they should be ecstatic, right? After eating the god of war, the big rooster turned his head without any loss and looked coldly in the direction of the Minotaur warrior. That look. It was as if he was looking at a piece of walking dried beef jerky. It made many Minotaur lords feel physically uncomfortable. No. When did even roosters look at them like this? In the sky, the Lord of Holy Light glanced at the sun god. Fight again. The sun god snorted coldly. It's just killing a mere god of war. I haven't looked at that fool straight in the face for 10,000 years. He is obviously a true god in concept, but he still retains a flesh body and doesn't even say a word when something happens. In his brain full of muscles, there is nothing else to do except fighting. And, he is the kind who only cares about fighting and doesn't care about winning, the moon goddess added faintly. The god of war may have been just a small role 10,000 years ago. But among the living gods, it can be said to be thunderous. He only cares about fighting and doesn't care about winning. Whoever becomes his believer will be unlucky for 8 lifetimes. But the Lord of Holy Light ignored the two gods' change of subject. So, fight again, he continued to ask. Humph, Holy Lord, do you really think I'm afraid of you? The sun god snorted coldly, I'm just doing this for that person's sake. The Lord of Holy Light paused. Finally remembered. You said the same thing 10,000 years ago. The sun god chooses to support the revival of the holy power. All the lords under the sun god automatically join the all-out war against the gods. The goddess of the moon chooses to support the revival of the holy power. All the lords under the goddess of the moon automatically join the all-out war against the gods. In an instant, the paladins and the sun knights who were constantly fighting on the ground battlefield paused. At the junction of the holy light god system, the battlefield, which had just been filled with the sound of swords and guns, suddenly became quiet. The wargame lord on the side of the sun god listened to the notification of the sudden change of camp. For a moment, the whole person was stunned. No, according to the order of the saint's son, they had to seize the preserved source from Asher's hands. But now this posture. A lord swallowed his saliva. Because the sun god defected to the camp, if they want to attack the holy light god system, their ally now. The sun knight, a mysterious system of soldiers, is probably unmanageable. And if they use ordinary soldiers, Let them use those sword and shield soldiers to fight against the paladin. Glancing at the paladin's upright body, a cross shield still exudes a faint glow in their hands. In the previous battlefield, they have seen the paladin's tenacious survival ability. Except for the Sun Knight, the rest of the soldiers can stab them in the chest with a knife. The paladin can also take out the knife and chop them in half. In addition to the paladin, the combat effectiveness of the various walker troops of the Five Elements God system is generally higher than that of ordinary soldiers. Without the Sun Knight, how can this battle be fought? Just when many lords were frowning, a gentle voice sounded at the back of the battlefield. Everyone. Wen Ziyi's figure appeared between the two opposing sides. Looking at Wen Ziyi, many lords on both sides couldn't help but blush. Some of them had seen Wen Ziyi before. But for some reason, although Wen Ziyi's face did not change much at this moment, but there was always a faint temperament that made people want to get close to him. It seemed that boys were not impossible. Wen Ziyi frowned slightly. Why did he feel that the situation was a little different from what he imagined? He wanted to be a lobbyist to mediate. I just don't know why. Since he walked to the center of the battlefield, the lords on both sides have all focused their attention on him. As for fighting, it seems that many people have lost the desire to fight. Can you listen to me? After Wen Ziyi spoke, there was silence on the battlefield. The expected rebuttal did not appear. Everyone looked at Wen Ziyi eagerly, as if waiting for him to finish his words. Wen Ziyi seemed to realize something at this time. He stretched out his hand and pinched his face. So, is this the beautiful privilege mentioned by the elf lord? He coughed twice. Wen Ziyi continued to speak. You are all brothers of the same race. It is understandable that you fought with different positions before. Now we have returned to the same camp, since there is no reason to be enemies with each other. Why do you still want to fight with swords? Seeing that no one answered, Wen Ziyi estimated that everyone was still afraid of the Son of God. I know you have received the order from that saint, but he is the saint of our saints, and so is Lord Izir. No need to say more. A voice suddenly came from the Sun God system. We stand on the same front with the Holy Light God system. As he said this, a lord had already commanded his Sun Knights to peacefully cross the defense line of the Five Elements God system and attack the Minotaur. Wen Ziyi looked at the situation in the Sun God system with some surprise. This situation was much smoother than he expected. Now as long as the troops of the Five Elements God system turn their spearheads again, the defense system of the Saint Trinity will return again. Lord of all people, am I the only one in the fallen empire? Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 145. And the Saints are the advantaged party in this war game. Once the Trinity defense system returns, it also means that this war game is about to end. If it was before, they would not dare to say so when they joined the revival of holy power. But now look at the war interface. There are several more gods on the revival of holy power side. Although the number is still scarce, they are all very high quality gods such as the Lord of Holy Light and the Sun God. Let's look at the war weariness of both sides. 57%, 100%. The first time I saw the war weariness, all the lords who were just immersed in the meat-mincing war were dumbfounded. The war weariness of the gods was maxed out. No wonder it seems that from a certain moment, the main force of the Sun God system has completely become the Sun Knight. All ordinary soldiers began to feel that they were not working hard. It turned out that the war weariness was broken. Thinking of this, the lords of the Sun God system looked at the many ordinary soldiers who had just retreated and looked calm. They couldn't help but feel scared. After changing camps, the soldiers' emotions stabilized. But if they hadn't changed camps just now, with their fierce fighting style, I'm afraid the soldiers under their command were ready to face the enemy with their heads. Seeing that the matter was over, Gao Qian controlled his eyes and looked around. In addition to the root vines still spreading, the Holy Light God system seemed to have nothing else to pay attention to. He stopped scaring Suyukei. After sending the root vine mother tree back to its original position, Gao Qiang moved the eye located on Suyukei's head to a distance. I don't know how much sand value Suyukei lost just now. Gao Qiang specially left the chicken god there. Presumably, the furry chicken god should be able to soothe his frightened heart. After doing all this, Gao Qiang retracted his eyes and sent a message to Aisyer, Suyukei and other people he knew. Come to the life god system for a chat. A few days passed in the blink of an eye. With the collapse of the coalition forces, thick smoke floated above the life god system. Along with it, there was also a strange fragrance. Aisyer had brought Wenziyi here under the escort of hundreds of paladins. As for the other son of the saint, those lords who came from the sun god system had already petitioned on their own to take him down for Wenziyi. Whenever he thought of this, Wenziyi couldn't help but shudder. The beautiful privilege was indeed very useful. But for some reason, he always felt that the other lords looked at him more and more strangely. When the two arrived, Gao Qiang had already started eating. In addition to Aisyer and the others, Suyukei came earlier. After his territory was destroyed and he had nowhere to go, he simply came to the life god system to join Gao Qiang. He simply got a few more meals from Juluo than others. In addition to Suyukei, Yana was also forced by Satan to come here. At the beginning, he was unwilling. Why do I have to come here? Yana asked Satan helplessly. The only response was Satan's terrifying smile, because I am happy to do so. But since seeing Lan Yan, Yana's face changed instantly. Humph, I told you to hunt me down, I told you to sacrifice yourself, you are so shameless. While saying this, Yana kicked Lan Yan's crotch fiercely. Looking at Lan Yan's bloodshot eyes, Yana snorted coldly. You didn't even scream, I didn't expect you to be so courageous. Lan Yan, whose mouth was blocked, couldn't make any sound at all. Yana, who was in a good mood, turned around and just met Aisyer and the other person who walked into the Shrine of Life. Another holder of the source? Yana and Wenziyi looked at each other and thought subconsciously. Satan was just flying in the sky at this time, looking at the expressions of the two with interest. After a few seconds of silence, Aisyer seemed to have noticed something. Catch that elf. The paladin did not move. On the contrary, after Asher's order was issued, the paladins all knelt down on one knee in one direction. You guys. Asher was about to speak, but he thought of something the next moment. After adjusting his expression, Asher looked into the depths of the shrine. The only person in this world who could make the paladin do this was Gao Qiang, who was blessed by the Lord of Holy Light. It was the same as Asher expected. No, there was still a little difference. Gao Qiang came out with a bowl of beef noodles that looked very unusual. Seeing so many people gathered outside the shrine, Gao Qiang subconsciously said, "Come and eat together." After 3 rounds of wine, the dishes were 5 flavors. Asher blushed and wiped the corners of her mouth. I don't know why she started to eat with them. Moreover, Gao Qiang's cook is also great. I'm afraid there is no better chef in the entire Holy Light God system. Even the ingredients she uses are mythical ingredients. If I had known that I could get such a meal here, who would stay in the bitter and cold place of the Holy Light God system? At this moment, Aisyer suddenly felt his shoulder being touched. I am enjoying my meal, a teasing voice came from behind. Wenziyi. Aisyer looked back, but found that it was not Wenziyi, but a person wearing a pure white cloak. You are, the Lord of Holy Light? Aisyer asked hesitantly. From the breath, it feels like the Lord of Holy Light. The Lord of Holy Light nodded. Not only him, but behind him, the sun god and the moon goddess also turned into human form and came to the Shrine of Life. Most people have no objection to the change of their camp. These conceptual gods have no entity, and they are probably not tasty when eaten. Others don't care, and Gao Qiang doesn't care even more. Anyway, enough gods have been eaten in this period of time. Various new primitive gods have been successfully served on the table. Sasha's 40th edition of the Bible has also been greatly enriched. Life is just like heaven. Sasha said so while holding her full stomach. On the other hand, Gao Qiang called the familiar people to come, and also wanted to take advantage of the fact that this war game has not ended yet, so that everyone can get together and have a good meal and part ways in peace. Now, it's almost time to end. Ai Sieter smiled at Gao Qiang. After this war game, the saints will probably recognize your status as the Son of God. And when Ze2, please take care of me in the future. After saying that, Ai Sieter playfully stuck out her tongue. This was the first time she made such an undignified move in this war game. For the saints, although they did not deal with the source atheism this time, but they unexpectedly gained the two sources of foundation and beauty, which can be regarded as exceeding the task. And then, as the last righteous god in the sky was slowly stuffed into his mouth by data deleted, the gods, who were 100% war-weary, finally collapsed completely. Congratulations on completing the Battle of Heaven as the winner, you will enjoy heaven alone with your followers. In addition, after this game is over, you can choose to take away an item in this game. Calculating your contribution in this total war. Your contribution is 93%, so the item level you can choose is Miracle and below. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Lord of all people, am I the only one in the fallen empire? Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 146. Since more than 95% of religions have now been assigned to your pantheon. Congratulations to the old gods for achieving the victory goal, religious victory. Did you unexpectedly achieve religious victory? Gao Qiang raised his eyebrows. In the case of the resurrection of the gods, it is almost impossible to achieve religious victory based solely on the will of believers. However, data delete ate most of the gods. Now in this war game, it seems that there are no religions left. I opened the contribution interface and took a look, because this war game did not do many things like genocide. Although the contribution points obtained in the second level battlefield are generally higher. But Gao Qiang only got nearly 800,000 contribution points, which is not as much as in the ancient times. Of course, if the coalition forces were killed, this number would probably be more than dozens of times. But Gao Qiang is not a murderous demon. Stop when you are ahead, so as not to take too much land and end badly. Without entanglement so much, Gao Qiang turned to ask Ai Sieter and others. Do you have anything else to stay for? Suyukai shook his head. Since his territory had been demolished, he naturally didn't want to stay in this war game for too long. After saying goodbye to everyone, Suyukai immediately confirmed the settlement. On the other side, Ai Sieter had no intention of settling for the time being. She naturally heard the reminder of victory. But after all, she is the son of a saint. She still has a lot of work to do before the forced settlement. Seeing this, Gao Qiang didn't say anything. Anyway, everyone has added friends, and it's not too late to talk about anything later. After a simple greeting, Gao Qiang also confirmed the final settlement of this war game. Zhuoluo just narrowed his eyes and waved at Gao Qiang. And said the same words as last time. See you next time. As Gao Qiang flew up to the sky, he instantly disappeared from everyone's sight. The rest of the people stared at each other and gradually dispersed. On the ruins of the old shrine, Zinke lay down in the middle of the collapsed rubble, quietly enjoying the starlight at night. What a quiet night, isn't it? Your Excellency the High Priest. An old voice came from behind Zinke. Zinke turned sideways and glanced behind him. After seeing the appearance of the person who came, Zinke retracted his gaze. It turns out to be the high priest. Didn't you accompany our lovely lord to go out and make trouble? Isn't it the same for the high priest? The visitor asked with a smile, and then sat down next to Zinke. After a moment of silence, the visitor said faintly, "Has anyone told you that your taste in writing scripts is really bad?" Huh. Zinke looked to the side in confusion. But he found that the old woman next to him was holding another Bible in her hand. Obviously, all the Bibles were destroyed because of the destruction of the old shrine. The next moment, the words of the visitor solved Zinke's doubts. "Mother-in-law, I found it in the Lord's hall. Those little girls and boys are really troublesome." "I agree with this," Zinke chuckled, agreeing with the other party's words. Then, Zinke changed his tone and asked directly, "Would you like to read this Bible to me? I think you should have found a lot of clues." The visitor smiled slightly. "The things written in this Bible are slightly different from the one the Lord saw." Then she told a story. In the Bible that Gao Qiang saw, the gods are not bound by the technology tree, so they can easily break through the boundaries of the world. But as the gap between gods and mortals widened, gods gradually occupied the sky and land, while mortals were driven underground, curled up and prayed for the mercy of gods. And then, they defeated the gods and returned the world to the new civilizations. A wonderful fairy tale of a brave man defeating a dragon. But in this new Bible, it is not the case. The gods are satisfied with the sky and the land. But there is one being who is different. He wants the sky, the mountains, the sea, everything on the earth, and everything underground. Every flower, grass, sand, and stone should be under his control. "Lord of the three realms," the visitor said. "I didn't expect you to find me." Zinke smiled slightly, "Yes." Before he finished speaking, the Bible had been placed in his arms. "You wrote this book, too?" Tisk. Zinke's smile disappeared, and he tisked in boredom. "So I hate talking to smart people." Stretching, Zinke said helplessly, "Yes, yes, there are so many bitter hatreds in this world, I just want them to let me out." "So, are you satisfied?" For a moment, the two of them fell silent again. "Let's go," the old woman asked. Zinke shook his head. "After you leave, this world will be my canvas, and I will use it to write a new story." "Well, this time there will be no story about you." Hearing this, the old woman did not persuade him any more, but stood up and walked out of the territory of the Wall of Sighs. After walking a few steps, she seemed to remember something, so she turned around and said to Zinke, "The story you wrote is really bad." Standing on the sky, Gao Qiang looked down at the surface of the war game. The settlement site of the war game is very high. It is even far beyond the position where the gods can stand. So much so that from this angle, Gao Qiang can see the shadow of the Lord of Holy Light like an ant. But the Lord of Holy Light can't notice him at all. "Your war contribution is being settled. Since you have 773,000 war contributions, your contribution will be converted into 77,300 war coins. After the war coins are converted, like last time, the next step is a lot of weighted calculations about land and resources. This represents the land weight that Gao Qiang can allocate." Looking at the rapidly jumping numbers in front of him, even if Gao Qiang thinks with his butt, he knows that the land seized this time is not much less. Fortunately, this time it is on the open space near the college, so there will be no problems. If he adds a territory between two prosperous urban areas like before, the military will probably want to beat him up. After the weighted calculation of the land is completed, next, it is the moment that Gao Qiang is most looking forward to. Since you participated in the total war, your contribution is 93%, you can take away any item you have owned and use it in your future games. In the last war game, Gao Qiang chose the fallen empire. I don't know what good things I can choose this time. Of course, because this battle in heaven is counted as a total war, the level of items that Gao Qiang can choose is also limited to the miracle level. Lord of all people, am I the only one in the fallen empire? Author, Mi Shi De. Chapter 147. Open the selection interface. Compared with the Stone Age, this feudal age has a lot more good things to choose from because it has changed into the Myth Age. Among them, almost every god-related item can be evaluated as a wonder. For example, the Dark Bible of the God of Darkness, or the Life Canon of the God of Life. Among them, Gao Qiang also saw the new book written by Shasha and others. 18 Cooking Methods of Primitive Gods, 40th Revised Edition. This book is actually counted as a wonder. Effect 1, when the force holding this book faces a myth unit, the threat level increases by 40%. Effect 2, increase damage to myth units by 10%. Effect 3, when the enemy in the war has a myth unit, the opponent's war weariness acquisition speed increases by 10%, and our war weariness acquisition speed decreases by 20%. The bonus given by this book is quite considerable. But if you think about it carefully, the restrictions are not small. Myth units are unique to the Myth Age. Even if there are in other war games, Gao Qiang may not encounter them again. If you choose to take this book away, the biggest possibility is that it will be useless for a long time in the future. Considering this, Gao Qiang continued to flip through the pages. Soon, Gao Qiang saw a familiar guy from a large number of items that could be chosen. Data deleted. Features, remnant of the past, power of creation, cannot be looked at directly, universal salvation, kindness. Can your own God be taken away? And the cost of taking it away is not high. Data deleted without the cruel attribute is only counted as a miracle item. In addition to data deleted, some buildings can also be taken away. For example, Forgotten River. Taking Forgotten River away is only equivalent to taking away a miracle item. There is even a high probability that a 3-no girl named Forgotten River with lifeless eyes will be given as a gift. But considering the consequences of taking Forgotten River back, Gao Qiang hurriedly shook his head. If Forgotten River is really placed near the college, it is estimated that all the students and military personnel who pick up and drop off students will be unlucky. In this way, it seems that data deleted with kindness in its characteristics is safer. After all, he is a good god with 9 merits. Without looking down, Gao Qiang directly chose data delete as the item he took away from this war game. The settlement of the war game came to an end. Gao Qiang's consciousness suddenly flew upwards, and the continent under his feet quickly disappeared without a trace. However, if he had continued to scroll down a little bit just now, Gao Qiang would have found out. Zinky. Level. Back. Shaking his head, Gao Qiang looked around. This time he did not appear in any primeval forest like last time. It is unknown whose land he plundered. This time, Gao Qiang fell into the mud as soon as he landed. There were black plants everywhere around. Reaching out to grab, there was no support point at all. Therefore, Gao Qiang could only watch himself being gradually swallowed by the swamp. At this moment, ouch! A small black long square suddenly lay on Gao Qiang's shoulder. I thought I would sink down. But the next moment, Gao Qiang suddenly found that he had the ability to stand on the mud. Struggling to pull his body out of the mud, Gao Qiang looked at the endless swamp and couldn't help twitching his mouth. This time, it seems that he accidentally plundered more. Because Suyukai entered from a different place than himself, Gao Qiang didn't know whether Suyukai would be affected by his return. As for now, he could only wish him good luck. In order to avoid the academy not being able to find him, Gao Qiang didn't plan to walk around casually. Compared to those, Gao Qiang glanced at his shoulder. Then he picked up data delete. After being taken out of the war game, the smell of alcohol on data delete finally disappeared. But why did it suddenly become so small? Gao Qiang picked up data delete and shook it with some doubts. Previously in the war game, data delete was able to wrap himself up completely. But when he took it out, it was not even half the size of his arm. Could it be because he lost his cruelty? Is Zibai really that much weaker? Whoa! Data delete's body shook in Gao Qiang's hands, as if he wanted to struggle out. After finding that he didn't have enough strength, he wilted down in a huff. Suddenly, Gao Qiang smiled evilly. In the war game, data delete always liked to hug him. Now, it's his turn. Before Gao Qiang could do anything to data delete, suddenly, another weight fell from Gao Qiang's head, and Gao Qiang was once again thrown into the mud. Pain, pain, pain. A neutral voice came from Gao Qiang's head. It was not until he climbed out of the mud again that Gao Qiang saw what had just hit him. A human girl wearing very cool clothes. Then, being carried by Satan and flying in the air? Satan. Are you Yana? Gao Qiang asked subconsciously. Hearing the familiar voice, Yana also subconsciously looked down, then leaned back and pressed against Satan's chest. Why is it you? Then he saw Gao Qiang's strange expression. Yana subconsciously touched and sniffed his body. Until he touched two large balls of flesh. Ah! After a while, Yana, who finally calmed down, hugged his knees and quietly waited for death in the swamp. I'm not going to live anymore, I'm not going to live anymore. The swamp gradually overwhelmed Yana's head. But every time this happened, Satan flying over Yana's head would take action in time, holding Yana's neck and pulling her out of the swamp. Gao Qiang sat aside, watching the scene strangely. Then he couldn't help but point at Satan and asked Yana, so the item you brought out this time actually chose him. Because of joining Gao Qiang's side, Yana also got the identity of the winning side. What Gao Qiang didn't expect was why Yana would want to bring out Satan. No, now it's her for some reason. Did she really think she could control Satan? Even if it was just a fake Satan that was created. But what Gao Qiang didn't expect was that after hearing this question, Yana looked up at him with resentment. He chose it himself. As Yana's clone, Satan can not only touch Yana's panel, but also directly choose to bring out the game's loot. Not surprisingly, he chose himself without hesitation. As for the current situation, Yana seemed to realize something, and suddenly raised his head to look at Satan. It's all your fault, right? Lord of all people, am I the only one in the fallen empire? Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 148. You turned me into a human, right? You turned me into a woman, right? Listening to Yena's hysterical roar, Satan scratched his ears without any guilt. Yes. You. Yena pointed at Satan, not knowing what to say for a moment. You say he has means, he does have means. Even Gao Qiang doesn't know how he did it. By deceiving the race judgment of the war game, Yena was judged as the lord of the human race, and he was able to return to the human plane. Such a strange method, even if you search through the wisdom hub, you may not have heard of it. Satan is rebellious enough. But what Yena can't understand is, why did she become a human female? Ah! Listening to the roar coming from his ears, Satan quickly blocked his ears. Is it his illusion? Why does he feel that Yena has become more and more roaring since the sex change? But he is Satan. Satan smiled. If disguising Yena as a human can be said to be avoiding the mother tree's pursuit, then turning Yena into a woman is simply his bad taste. He, Satan, has acted absurdly throughout his life, but why should he explain to others? But the human lord who created himself. Satan looked at Gao Qiang with ill intentions. After leaving the war game, without so many eyes and tentacles, he wanted to see who could protect Gao Qiang. A flash. Satan has flapped his wings and brought Yena close to Gao Qiang. You created me, so you have to fulfill my 3 wishes. Gao Qiang was really amused by Satan's shamelessness. Still playing like this? What's the difference between this and when he was looking for a miracle path and asked for 999 wishes? What if I don't agree? Don't agree? Satan smiled grimly, and his claw slowly approached Gao Qiang. I know you are very strong in war games. But you are in a vacancy right now, aren't you? If I kill you here, who will avenge you? As he spoke, Satan felt a little itchy on his face. Of course it wasn't because he felt embarrassed. But something was scratching his face. Looking sideways, Satan suddenly found that a rectangular block that looked like a Q-version cat had climbed onto his shoulder at some point. At this moment, the block also stretched out an oval little hand, poking Satan's face from time to time. You little thing. Satan retracted his threatening claws and was about to reach out to the block. However, the next moment, Satan suddenly stopped. He saw dozens of eyes suddenly grow on the block, and several twisted tentacles stretched out from the block. Is it you? As he spoke, Satan's tone was slightly trembling. Looking at the familiar tentacle, he seemed to realize something. But what he could never have imagined was, what kind of thing can be brought out? Ah ha ha ha. Suddenly, Satan raised his head and laughed loudly. Just when Gao Qiang thought that the other party was going to explode, Satan suddenly lowered his head. I was wrong. I was just joking. Gao Qiang and Yana looked at Satan in silence. Yana turned her head away. I don't know him, he is not my clone. After the farce came to an end, Satan still volunteered to find a piece of land that would not sink. For everyone to rest temporarily, and wait for the academy to pick them up. In his spare time, Gao Qiang couldn't help asking some questions. For example, why did Yana suddenly become a human female and come near Gao Qiang? Talking about this, Satan stood up and said, at this point, don't you understand? My heart is for humans, and this is true for the world. I'm sorry for being born a demon. Gao Qiang looked at Yana and then at Satan. I understand the truth. But why did she change and not you? Because she is the original body, Satan said without hesitation. Really? Seeing Gao Qiang's suspicion, Satan raised his hand and swore, I, Satan, swear to hell, if I tell a lie, let me go to heaven now. A few seconds later, nothing happened. Satan smiled and said, see, I said I didn't lie, right? Then why is it a human female? Yana asked faintly. Until now, she is still holding on to the key point of female. In the past, he was at least a cute and handsome man among the elves. He is several times better than Lan Yan. Lan Yan is also an elf after all, and a mediocre face is also very handsome in the eyes of humans. But in Yana's words, this mediocre appearance can be summed up in one word, ugly. Yana always thought that Lan Yan was ugly and couldn't stand other brothers and sisters being good. It's a pity. This time, after leaving the war game, Yana also lost the word man, and only beauty remained. I couldn't come up with a good reason at the moment. Satan could only look at Yana dimly. Tisk. Did you just tisk? Did you just tisk? Ignoring Yana's shout, Satan looked around. Suddenly, he pointed at data deleted and changed the subject. Why don't we give him a name? Yana opened her mouth. Has she been ignored? Okay, Gao Qiang nodded. It was indeed not convenient to keep calling data deleted. It would be nice to find something to do before the people from the academy came to pick him up. She was really ignored. Yana pouted and turned away, leaving only a lonely back to everyone, giving people a feeling of pity. Gao Qiang shook his head violently. After reminding himself several times that Yana was a man, Gao Qiang focused his attention completely on data deleted. In fact, he was not very good at naming. Especially naming God, he was even worse. From the appearance of data deleted, it was pitch black, called the god of darkness. It seems to overlap with other gods, and the name of a certain god doesn't sound good. He grabbed data deleted and shook it. Meow. He listened to data deleted's cry. How about calling it cat? Gao Qiang subconsciously said what was in his mind. But then he shook his head. Not domineering enough. He picked up data deleted, squeezed it, and rubbed it. Gao Qiang's eyes suddenly lit up, and he seemed to have a good idea. How about calling it black dumpling? Meow. Data deleted showed two wide eyes, with a dazed expression. Gao Qiang thought about it. If combined with the characteristics of the old days, we can call it the black dumpling left over from yesterday. Puff. Yana, who was holding his breath, suddenly laughed out loud. Satan, on the other hand, clapped his hands seriously. What a good name. The black dumpling left over from yesterday's meal is such a rare and good name. But from the bottom of Satan's eyes, he showed a gloating smile to the black dumpling. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Lord of all people, am I the only one in the fallen empire? Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 149. Let's decide to call the leftover black dumplings eaten yesterday. My nickname will be Black Dumplings. Woo. The black dumpling slumped his body, looking wilted. It seems that he likes you to get this name. Satan nodded and confirmed. Whoa. Black dumpling tilted his head and looked at Satan with wide eyes. It's a pity that he can't speak, otherwise he would definitely want to say something. At this time, a burst of electronic sound came from mid-air. Confirm identity, Gao Qiang. Perform recycling tasks. Gao Qiang turned around and saw a disc-shaped aircraft heading towards his direction. It's the Academy's aircraft. Before entering the war game and after applying for land, it was this kind of aircraft that brought Gao Qiang here. It stands to reason that after returning, the Academy's aircraft would not be so slow to find Gao Qiang. Perhaps the area of land brought back this time was so large that the aircraft got lost for a while. I saw that the disc was gradually approaching. Satan narrowed his eyes. Then he pulled Yena's neck, ignored Yena's exclamations, and penetrated directly into her body. You. When Yena spoke, Satan had disappeared. As a trait acquired by atheism in the feudal era, Yena has actually separated and combined with his doppelganger several times. But after the clone was transformed into Satan, this was the first time that he completely entered her body. This feeling is completely different from holding the clone before. It was as if there was another intelligent life in her body, which made Yena feel very uncomfortable. Sizzling. The disc has firmly stopped above the swamp, and it keeps making beeps urging Gao Qiang to come up. Picked up the black dumpling. Gao Qiang stood on the disc and turned to look at Yana. Do you want to come along? Going to the academy was not an option for Yena. After all, it is the human society that comes to avoid the Kabbalah tree of life. Going to the academy is like stepping out of the wolf's den and into the tiger's mouth. Gao Qiang knew this very well, so he just asked politely casually. Sure enough. Yana turned away and did not respond to Gao Qiang's words. She has made her stance clear. As for what she did that harmed human society, Gao Qiang wasn't too worried. The world era you are in is equivalent to the 5th level battlefield of a war game. No matter how strong Satan is, even if Satan is a mythical unit, he is still bound to feudal intensity. If Satan or Yena really had other intentions, the machine guns of modern warfare will teach her how to behave. Then, see you later. Gao Qiang waved his hand and was about to direct Yuan Pan to leave. but I heard Yena exclaiming, and he stood on the disc. I can't control my body. Yena said in horror. She didn't know why, but despite her rejection, her body started to move on its own. It wasn't until she stood on the disc that she regained control of her body. And when she had the idea of leaving the disc, her body would be out of control again. Satan. Yena said through gritted teeth. As a clone, Satan has gone too far. Not only did she forcibly change her gender and race, but now she also forcibly controlled her body. Yena didn't dare to think about what would happen in the future. However, when he turned his head, he was faced with the weird expressions of Gao Qiang and Haituanzi. I thought you weren't going to follow. At this time, the disc had gradually lifted into the sky, and several tiny pillars of fire flew towards the floating academy. If Yana wanted to go back on her word, it was already too late. Enter the academy through the aircraft's exclusive docking channel. I don't know if it's because there has never been such a precedent. Yena's identity as an elf was not noticed by the academy, and he followed Gao Qiang to the aircraft's docking point smoothly. In this place, there is already a person standing here, waiting for Gao Qiang's arrival. See the person waiting in front of you. Gao Qiang smiled and raised his hand to say hello, Senior Qi Ling. We haven't seen each other for more than half a year. It turns out that Junior still remembers me. Qi Ling also returned a polite smile. But the next moment, she saw the woman standing next to Gao Qiang. He doesn't look like a student from the academy. He glanced at Yena's face and chest with small eyes. Qi Ling showed a sweet smile that everyone knew. I haven't seen you in half a year. I'm so happy. Ah. Seeing that Qi Ling seemed to have misunderstood something, Gao Qiang opened his mouth and was about to explain. But was directly interrupted by Qi Ling. Okay, I'm not a counselor, so I won't care about your kind of stuff. I'm just responsible for taking you to see Mr. M. If you have any questions, please tell Mr. M. By the way, the classmate who entered school with you has just passed away. Gao Qiang knew clearly in his heart that what Qi Ling was talking about should be Suyukai. Because Suyukai settled early, he happened to be staggered away from himself, so it was naturally easy for him to be found and picked up by the Academy's aircraft. Next, Qi Ling no longer mentioned anything about Yana, but led the way for Gao Qiang. Yana and Satan remained very silent along the way. Only Gao Qiang and Qi Ling chatted without a word. During the chat, Gao Qiang learned what Qi Ling had done in the past 6 months. The first thing was the grade. After 6 months of unremitting efforts, Qi Ling has successfully been promoted from sophomore to junior. Although he did not enter the war game, he was one step closer to the academic path. On the other hand, most of the people who entered the school with Gao Qiang also passed the freshman certification and are now studying for the sophomore courses. Well, we are here. Qi Ling suddenly stopped. The means of movement in the college are very convenient, with stairs and elevators everywhere. Therefore, after a few words, the three of them were already standing in front of Mr. M's office. Dong dong dong. Qi Ling knocked on the door of the office. Come in. As Mr. M finished speaking, a man walked out of the office. Brother Qiang. Seeing Gao Qiang, Suyukai scratched the back of his head. He didn't know what he was doing in this war game, and he was a little embarrassed to see Gao Qiang at this moment. There is the self-confidence provided by the Stone Age. Suyukai thought that this war game would be a battle between you and me. But he didn't expect that after a period of confused development, he was directly beaten by the Minotaur. If it weren't for a terrifying creature descending from the sky, Suyukai was not sure if he could still see the sun today. It was also because of this war game that Suyukai finally realized the gap between himself and those members of the big forces. The gap was in vision, awareness, and planning ability. It was not something that could be made up by a little resource. Of course, this does not apply to the situation where Gao Qiang sent out resources that completely crushed the opponent. Lord of all people, am I the only one in the fallen empire? Author, Me. Chapter 150. Who is it? I'll wait for you, Brother Chiang, outside. Suyukai scratched his head and stood beside Qi Ling. Gao Qiang patted Suyukai's big belly jokingly, then nodded and walked past Suyukai into the office. Yena glanced at him with a sidelong glance. As a result, his body followed Gao Qiang's back uncontrollably. Who is she? Seeing Yena also following him, Suyukai looked at Qi Ling with curious eyes. Qi Ling looked around and saw that no one was paying attention to him. Then he showed an expression that all men understood and whispered in Suyukai's ear. In the office, Mr. M was sitting at his desk, watching the fax machine at hand printing words continuously. The fax machine was just an ordinary old-fashioned fax machine. But the words printed in it came from a higher plane. Take your eyes away from the fax machine and look straight ahead. Gao Qiang was already standing in front of him. Of course, it wasn't just Gao Qiang. When Mr. M saw Yena's figure appear behind Gao Qiang, he rubbed his temples with a headache. As a counselor, he was sure that the girl behind Gao Qiang was definitely not a student of the college. Since she was not a student, she should be a child from the outside city. I don't know how Gao Qiang could bring someone back in the half-hour pickup after returning from the war game. But Mr. M still said earnestly, Gao Qiang, the college is a very serious place. It's not appropriate for you to bring your girlfriend here, right? Listening to Mr. M's words, Gao Qiang turned around and glared at Yena fiercely. No wonder those students looked at him with a blessing look along the way. It turned out that he regarded Yena as his girlfriend. But the problem is that only Gao Qiang himself knows that Yena is 100% a boy, but was turned into this by Satan. Forget it, I will contact the military to send her home later. I don't want it. Yena suddenly spoke, and her loud voice scared Mr. M. But then, seeing Mr. M shifting his attention, Yena quickly showed a delicate expression. There were already tears in the corners of her eyes, as if she was about to cry. Gao Qiang pulled the corners of his mouth. I can only say that it doesn't look like acting. Yena definitely doesn't have such good acting skills. There is no need to think about it, it must be Satan who took over Yena's body. After all, it is not her own body, so she won't feel ashamed to use it, but I don't know what Satan is up to. Seeing Mr. M looking at her, Yena covered her mouth with her little hands and turned her head away with tears in her eyes. I don't have a home anymore. I can only say that he is worthy of being Satan, and he can lie as soon as he opens his mouth. In the tearful words, Satan has successfully packaged Yena as a poor person whose parents have both passed away. If Qi Ling or others were present, I am afraid they would cry out of empathy at this moment. But he is facing Mr. M. Mr. M still has a cold face and looks inhuman. But Yena had said so much. He chased people away and made him look like a bully. There was nothing he could do with little Yena, so Mr. M could only glare at Gao Qiang fiercely. Because you are not a student of the college, I will not approve an extra dormitory. You can do it yourself. Yena quickly pointed at Gao Qiang, I will share a dormitory with him. Humph. Mr. M did not hold on to this topic. Instead, he changed the subject and asked Gao Qiang an irrelevant question. What is your reason for joining the war game, and why are you in a hurry to participate in the war game? After saying that, Mr. M stretched out his hand and pressed it down. Don't rush to answer my question, listen to me. I have already talked to your friend. For him, joining the war game is completely aimless. In fact, it makes no difference to him whether he participates in the war game or not. Land. Resources. Or become stronger. For Suyukai, these seem to have no meaning. This is also the difference between ordinary people and members of big forces. For members of big forces, they seem to be born with a mission. They have something they have to fight for, and reasons they have to fight. But Suyuki doesn't. So I persuaded him, Mr. M continued. Continuously participating in war games will not do him any good. And he also feels his own shortcomings. In the future, he is preparing to study the path of the academy. Even if he can't really join the academy in the future, he won't be as confused as he is now. Gao Qiang nodded first, and then looked at Mr. M. So, Mr. M is going to persuade me too. In fact, Gao Qiang saw some clues when Mr. M came out to intercept him when he was about to enter the game last time. Mr. M seems to want everyone to become stronger, but he doesn't want everyone to participate in dangerous war games. Qi Ling is a good example. If Gao Qiang guessed correctly, Qi Ling should not have participated in any war games after joining the academy. Without the support of war coins, most of Qi Ling's information sources should come from the lectures of professors in the academy. But she can be promoted so quickly just by oral knowledge. If she goes to the war game, Qi Ling may have a greater improvement. Of course, she may also die there. Yes, I am going to persuade you, Mr. M said. You have no goals, no beliefs, no reasons to fight, so why bother to risk your life to enter the war game continuously? Don't tell me that it is to bring land and resources to mankind. I can see that you are not that kind of person. Gao Qiang lowered his head and pondered for a long time. What Mr. M said is not bad. Land, resources, become stronger. Does he really need it? For many people, the infinite war is the final place. Does he really want to go? Think about it carefully, Mr. M continued. At least here, you still have your relatives, you can take advantage of the holidays to go around, and you can buy some snacks in your spare time. War is not something that children should consider. So Mr. M just treats me as a child? Gao Qiang smiled in his heart. But at this moment, Gao Qiang suddenly felt his sleeve being pulled. Turning his head, he saw Yane's resentful expression. It seemed that Gao Qiang was a heartless man if he didn't plan to participate in the war game. Looking at Yane's expression, Gao Qiang's heart moved and he had an excuse. Was his purpose in participating in the war game to protect? To protect the others around him? Of course not. I think I can really take a good rest, Gao Qiang replied to Mr. M with a smile.